Hi everyone. We're ready to start our new book here today, The Brixton Brothers, the case of mistaken identity. Um, I picked this book for a few reasons. One, it's a lot shorter than Bud Not Buddy. Everyone wanted a shorter book. And I think you'll notice as we get into it that your sort of daily readings are a lot shorter than Bud Not Buddy. The other reason I picked it is because it is a mystery type of book, and we hadn't really done one like that this school year. But I wanted to do the first chapter. I wanted to read it to you because there's a few parts in the first chapter where I want to explain a few words and things like that. In the first chapter, the main character, his name is Steve Brixton, is going to talk about this detective series he likes called The Bailey Brothers. And that's kind of like these old books here, Hardy Boys, sort of an old series where they go and they solve mysteries and things like that. And there were a bunch of these Hardy Boys books made, and I think they make them new now. They make them into graphic novels. So if you like the mystery book we're going to be reading, you might want to pick up one of these. You won't understand this now, but after we get into the Brixton Brothers a little bit, it's funny that I happened to grab this Hardy Boys book because there's hundreds of these books. This one's called The Missing Chums, and that word chums is going to come in later in this book. So I just thought that was funny. Anyway, so I'm going to be doing a bunch of chapters with you guys. Some days I'm going to record a video like this and you'll just watch it and follow along. And then some days there's the option to meet on a Zoom meeting and we'll kind of read it together and talk about it. But on the days when I'm doing the reading, I'd like you to have your book in front of you following along just like we would have done in class this past year, all right? Hey, it's July 10th today. You've got about a month and I guess a month and a week, 5 weeks maybe, from today until school starts back up. So this is a great way to keep your brain in gear, and hopefully maybe you're reading other books too. I just finished a book last night, and so I'm starting this book here called The Old Lion, and it's a kind of a story version of Theodore Roosevelt's life. It's not a biography. It's kind of like if you'd see a movie on someone, I suppose. At least that's what it's supposed to be. So as soon as I'm done reading this first chapter, I'm going to be getting back to that. So anyway, the first chapter, if you want to turn there, and if you ever need to pause the video to, get your book and things like that, you can do that. But there's a word here in the chapter title that I want to talk about. The chapter's called America's Favorite Super Sleuths. And that's the word I wanted to talk about because Steve's going to use that word a bunch here in the first chapter and throughout the book is the word sleuth. And usually if I was reading this book in class, I'd be asking them to try and figure out what the word sleuth means. But I'm going to tell you, a sleuth is a detective. And if you don't know what a detective is someone who solves crimes or solves mysteries. So a sleuth is a detective, someone who solves mysteries. So I'm going to read the first chapter here, which is really just an introductory chapter. We get to learn about Steve and not much else. So here we go. Steve Brixton, a.k.a., also known as Steve, was reading on his too small bed. He was having trouble getting comfortable, and for a few good reasons. His feet were hanging off the edge. Bed springs were poking his ribs. His sheets were full of cinnamon graham cracker crumbs. But the main reason Steve was uncomfortable was that he was lying on an old copy of the Guinness Book of World Records, which was 959 pages long, and which he had hidden under his mattress. If for some reason you were looking under Steve's mattress and found the Guinness Book of World Records, you'd probably think it was just an ordinary book. That was the point. Open it up, and you'd see that Steve had cut an identical rectangle out from the middle of every one of its pages. Then he had pasted the pages together. It had taken over 2 weeks to finish, and Steve had developed an allergic reaction to the paste, but it was worth it. When Steve was done, the book had a secret compartment. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was a top secret book box. And inside that top secret book box was Steve's top secret notebook. And that top secret notebook was where Steve recorded all sorts of notes and observations, including, on page 1, a list of the 59 greatest books of all time. First on his list was a shiny red book called The Bailey Brothers Detective Handbook, written by MacArthur Bart. The handbook was packed with the real crime-solving tips and tricks employed by Sean and Kevin Bailey, aka America's favorite teenage super sleuths, aka the Bailey Brothers, in their never-ending fight against goons and baddies and criminals and crime. The Bailey Brothers, of course, were the heroes of the best detective stories of all time, the Bailey Brothers Mysteries. And their handbook told you everything they knew. What to look for at a crime scene. Shoe prints, tire marks, and fingerprints. The ways to crack a safe. Rip jobs, punch jobs, and old man jobs. And where to hide a top secret notebook in a top secret book box. Basically, the Bailey Brothers Detective Handbook told you how to do all the stuff that the Bailey Brothers were completely ace at. The Bailey Brothers, of course, were the sons of the world-famous detective Harris Bailey. They helped their dad solve his toughest cases, and they had all sorts of dangerous adventures. And these adventures were the subject of the 58 shiny red volumes that made up the Bailey Brothers Mysteries, also written by MacArthur Bart. Numbers 2 through 59 on Steve Brixton's list of the 59 greatest books of all time were taken up by the Bailey Brothers Mysteries. Steve had already read all the Bailey Brothers books. Most of them he had read twice. Few he'd read 3 times. His favorite Bailey Brothers mystery was whichever one he was reading at that time. That meant that right now, as Steve lay on his lumpy bed, his favorite book was Bailey Brothers number 13, The Mystery of the Hidden Secret. Steve was finishing up chapter 17, which at the moment was his favorite chapter, and which ended like this. "Jumping jackals," dark-haired Sean exclaimed, pointing to the back wall of the dusty old parlor. "Look, Kevin, that bookcase looks newer than the rest." "General George Washington," his blond older brother cried out. "I think you're right." Kevin rubbed his chin and thought, "Hold on just a minute, Sean. This mansion has been abandoned for years. Nobody lives here. So who would have built a new bookshelf?" Sean and Kevin grinned at each other. "The robbers!" they shouted in unison. "Say, I'll bet this bookshelf covers a secret passageway that leads to their hideout," Sean surmised. "Which is where we'll find the suitcase full of stolen loot," Kevin cried. The two sleuths crossed over to the wall and stood in front of the suspicious bookcase. Sean thought quietly for a few seconds. "I know. Let's try to push the bookcase over," Sean suggested. "Hey, it can't be any harder than Coach Biltmore's tackling practice," joked athletic Kevin, who lettered in football and many other varsity sports. "1, 2, 3, heave!" shouted Sean. The boys threw their weight into the bookshelf, lifting with their legs to avoid back injuries. There was a loud crash as the bookshelf detached from the wall and toppled over. The dust cleared away and revealed a long, dark hallway. "I knew it!" whooped Sean. "Let's go!" "Not so fast, kids," said a strange voice. "You won't be recovering the loot that easy." Sean and Kevin whirled around to see a shifty-eyed man limping toward them, his scarred face visible in the moonlight through the window. The man was holding a knife! That was where the chapter ended. And when Carol Brixton, aka Steve's mom, called him downstairs to dinner. Okay, so the first chapter, you learn that Steve is a big fan of these detective books, the Bailey Brothers. He's read all 59, and a lot of them he's read more than once. And kind of leads you to maybe think what this book is going to be about. Maybe you're kind of thinking, well, looking on the back, kind of looking at the front, and reading that first chapter, maybe Steve himself is going to have to solve a mystery, and maybe he's going to use what he's learned in these Bailey Brothers books to help him solve that mystery. So anyway, so we don't know what that mystery is yet, but we will hear soon. All right, I goofed up there. I didn't realize I planned on doing 2 chapters today. So, splicing these 2 videos together if you can't tell. So, we're going to go to chapter 2, which is on page 6. It's called An Exciting Case. So, if you need to pause your video to get there. Here we go. An exciting case. The Bailey Brothers Detective Handbook tells you how to size up suspicious characters, which is useful if you're eating dinner with safe crackers or cat burglars or your mom's new boyfriend. Here's what the handbook says about identifying crooks. Hey, sleuths. And a sleuth is detective, mystery solver. Sean and Kevin Bailey are always on the lookout for lawbreakers. You should keep your eyes peeled too. There are scoundrels everywhere. Spotting baddies is easy. They all look, dress, and act in a certain way. Take it from the Bailey Brothers, there are really only 3 types of criminals. And once you've got their distinguishing features memorized, you'll be an unstoppable crime-solving machine. You think that's true? There are only 3 kinds of criminals? I don't think so. Type 1. The tough, greasy hair, scars on face, stubble, tattoos, loud necktie, cheap suit, poorly concealed knife or gun, walks with a limp. Type 2. The ringleader. Red hair, shifty eyes, uses gel or pomade, well-trimmed mustache, turtleneck, tall, slender build, mysterious pinky ring, dressy trousers, walks with a limp. Or type 3, the hermit. Long white hair, wrinkly, crazy gleam in eye, missing teeth, large beard, uses an anchor as a weapon, torn shorts, walks with a limp. So according to the Bailey Brothers, those are the only 3 criminals. If you see them looking like that, they must be criminals. So I don't know about that. Steve's mom had a new boyfriend, a.k.a. Rick. Even though he never met Rick, Steve already knew he didn't like him. Rick might just be a dangerous criminal. Steve secretly hoped so. When Steve came downstairs, Rick was standing in the kitchen with his hands clasped behind his back. His mom was there too, nervously stirring a pot of spaghetti. Steve strode into the room, looking hard at Rick, but trying hard to look like he wasn't looking. "I'm Rick," said Rick. "You must be Steven." Rick was 5 feet 10 inches tall. "Steve," said Steve. Rick had a blonde mustache. "I've heard a lot about you, Steve," Rick said. Rick had no knife scars or prison tattoos, at least no visible ones. "Great," said Steve, who never knew what to say when people told him they'd heard a lot about him. It looked like Rick blow-dried his hair. Rick didn't have a limp. Rick was dressed in the tan uniform of the Ocean Park Police of an Ocean Park police officer. And so even Steve had to admit that Rick didn't fit the description of a hardened criminal. Too bad. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. "Dinner's ready," said Steve's mom, a little too cheerfully. Rick was off the hook for now. There was always Bailey Brothers number 24, the crooked cop caper. Rick may not have looked like a criminal, but he sure acted like a goon. He sure ate like a goon. When he sucked noodles off his fork, he sounded like a vacuum cleaner in need of repair. "What do you like to do for fun, Steve?" Rick asked after slurping a seemingly endless noodle into his mouth. "I don't know," Steve answered. "Stuff." Rick raised his eyebrows. "Steve's a big reader," Carol Brixton offered helpfully. Great. Now Steve was going to have to talk to Rick about books. "Oh, yeah?" said Rick. "What do you like reading?" "The Bailey Brothers." "Hey," said Rick. "Those books were big when I was a kid. They're about spies, right?" Detectives. It took all Steve's willpower to keep his eyes from rolling. Only a doofus thought the Bailey Brothers were spies. "Right, detectives. The Bailey Brothers were those kids who were always riding around on motorbikes saying, 'Gee whiz' and 'golly' while breaking up smuggling rings." Rick was smiling in a way Steve didn't like. "Well, let me tell you from experience, Steve, real private detectives are nothing like those Bailey Brothers." Steve clenched his teeth. He felt his neck heating up. The Bailey Brothers were real private detectives. This guy didn't know what he was talking about. "Trust me," said Rick, tapping his badge. "I know what I'm talking about. In the real world, detectives don't use magnifying glasses. They don't race around in roadsters. There are no hidden passageways. Nope. Private detectives spend most of their time alone in their cars, eating French fries and spying on jealous men's wives." Steve wished he could wallop Rick with a haymaker punch right in the kisser, just like Sean Bailey would do. He looked at his mom for help. Unbelievable. His mom was smiling at Rick. She actually seemed interested in what this guy was saying. "Yep," said Rick. "Real detective work is done by the cops. Take the case I'm working on now. Trying to catch this guy they call the Blackbird Robber." "The Blackbird Robber," said Steve's mom. "Sounds interesting, doesn't it, Steve?" Steve had to admit it did sound interesting. Still, he wasn't going to say so. "Yep, the Blackbird Robber, a jewel thief. This guy has been terrorizing all the rich old ladies in Ocean Park. Just last week, he stole a ring from Mrs. Wertheimer, the woman who owns that mansion on the cliffs. This ring was worth $50,000, Rick whistled. He took it while she was on a drive up the coast, and nobody could figure out how." Rick leaned over his elbows and lowered his voice. "The whole place was locked up. Mrs. Wertheimer had the best burglar alarm money can buy. Motion sensors all over the house, guard dogs so fierce you could catch rabies just from looking at them. I mean, this woman's got a serious jewel stash, and she's gone out of her way to make sure it stays safe, you know? But when the old lady got back home that night, the ring was missing from her bedroom. And get this, there were no broken windows, no open doors, and no fingerprints anywhere." "My goodness," said Steve's mom. Steve didn't say anything, but he was listening. "Here's the thing," Rick said. "The thief didn't take anything else. This ring was sitting out on a dresser next to a bunch of necklaces, bracelets, fancy watches, but he only took the ring. Guess he's not too greedy, Rick chuckled. Steve rocked back and forth in his chair. He could think better when he was moving. Why do they call him the Blackbird Robber? Steve asked. That's the best part. Every place the thief hits, he leaves behind a calling card. A single black feather. This guy's so confident he's taunting us. How exciting, said Steve's mom. Very exciting, Rick grinned. I've been pulling up files on jewel thieves from all over the state, and I'm working some promising leads. See, Steve, that's what real detective work is all about. Hard work and diligence. Rick emphasized this point by gracefully weaving a forkful of pasta through the air and slurping the noodles horribly. His mouth full of spaghetti, Rick said, and don't worry, Rick Elliott always gets his man. Steve looked right at Rick. I'm not sure your thief is a man. Rick stopped chewing. A female robber, huh? Look, I've always believed women are equal. Rick looked meaningfully at Carol. But most jewel thieves are men. It's just a fact. I mean, these guys steal jewelry. They don't wear it. Rick laughed at his own joke, and little pieces of spaghetti flew out of his mouth. But sure, Steve, just for you. Rick Elliott always gets his man or woman. Steve kept his eyes on Rick. I'm not sure the thief is even a human. Rick almost spit out a meatball. What do you think the author, Mac Barnett, is trying to get across about Steve's mom's new boyfriend, Rick? How does he seem to you? He seems kind of arrogant, thinks he's big stuff, kind of a slob. It doesn't seem like Steve likes him very much on that chapter. But what do you think also Steve might be saying as far as, I don't think the robber's even human? I wonder if he's cracked the case. If he has, it might tell us that Steve actually might be a pretty good sleuth or a pretty good detective. And maybe these Bailey Brothers books really are good books for people who want to become detectives. So tomorrow you get to read on your own on Chapter 3. And we'll meet back here on Wednesday for a Zoom meeting. I believe, let me double check there. That's right, a Zoom meeting where we will read Chapter 4 together. And if you can't make the meeting on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, then you'll just read that chapter on your own. Hope you enjoy the book. Enjoy the next chapter tomorrow, and I'll see you on Wednesday.